All right, everyone. So today we're going to be covering energy. Okay. We're going to start a new topic. It's called energy. Now, when it comes to energy, there's two types of energies. Okay. When it comes to energy, there's two types of energies. There's potential energy. And in this case, we're going to be, anytime we're talking about potential energy, I'm going to be using EP. Okay. I'm going to be using EP as a variable for potential energy. Okay. P for potential. The second type of energy that we're going to be dealing with is kinetic energy. And we're going to denote that by EK. We're going to denote that by EK. That's kinetic energy. Okay. What's the formula for potential energy? Your potential energy is equal to mgh. Remember that, guys. Your potential energy is equal to mgh, mass times gravity times height. So one thing to keep in mind is this potential energy, okay, is dependent on height. Potential energy is dependent on height. Remember that. Potential energy is dependent on height. Okay, if an object has a height, it will have a potential energy. I'm going to give you a quick example. Let's say I have a cliff and you have an object on the cliff. And let's say this cliff is 10 meters high. And mass of this object is 5 kg. You see, it has a height, right? Whenever it has a height, it will have a potential energy. What's the potential energy of this object going to be? Well, you're going to say, you know what, I'm going to use mgh to find that. What's the mass of the object? That's 5. G is 9.8. Now, guys, we're not going to use negative here because energy is a scalar term. Another thing to remember, energy is scalar, okay? It's not a vector. It's a scalar term. So you would just use 9.8 for G, and the height is 10. Now, if you multiply them, what do you guys get? You multiply them, 490. And the unit for energy is joules. Remember that, unit of energy is J. That's for joules, okay? Remember that. So a couple things to keep in mind. Potential energy is equal to mgh. That's the main formula. And you should know that potential energy is dependent on height. If an object has a height, it has a potential energy. Now, I have a question for you. Let's say if I have an object, it's lying on the ground. I have a 10 kg object which is sitting on the ground. Can you tell me what's the potential energy of this object going to be?
98 joules? Oh, no, 0, because if height is 0.
Exactly, because it's mgh, right? Well, if it's on the ground, the height is going to be 0, and 0 times anything is going to be equal to 0. So remember this, guys. Potential energy, what's it dependent on? It's dependent on height, because every object will have a mass. G will always be there. So the only thing that will matter for potential energy is your height, okay? It's dependent on height. If it's on the ground, your height is 0. That means your potential energy is going to be equal to 0. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The next topic that you're going to have to tackle is going to be change in potential energy. Next up, we're going to talk about change in potential energy. Okay. What's the meaning of change in potential energy? Well, I'm first going to write the formula down for that. Okay. Change in potential energy. This would only happen if you had an object which changed height. Imagine something like this. Imagine I had an object at this height, okay, and then you moved it to this height. Let's say this is your ground, and originally it was on a 5